What's up, everybody? It's Greg from Sleepers Media. We are a month into the college basketball season. There's been some great games, some great teams, some great players, but there's also been some teams that have underachieved relative to preseason expectations. Today, I want to talk about the 5 that have surprised me the most in a bad way, how they could fix their problems, and how likely I think it is that they will fix their problems by the time the season ends. But first, do me a favor, go subscribe to the Sleepers Media YouTube channel where you can see all the video content that myself and my co-host Carter Elliott are putting out on a weekly basis. We do a series called Drunk Scouts where we break down the best college players as NBA prospects while playing a drinking game. We do weekly podcast episodes with players, coaches, media members from around the sport of college basketball. Follow us at Sleepers Media on Twitter. Make sure you don't miss out on anything that we put out. All right, let's get right into it. Let's start with the team that pains me the most to say they've underachieved, the Michigan Wolverines. This team was a preseason top 5 team. People thought that this team would be a national contender from start to finish across this season, but they had to replace a lot. They had to replace Franz Wagner, the lottery pick, Sean D. Brown, Isaiah Livers, Mike Smith, all guys that were seniors last year that shot a ton of threes and made a ton of threes. However, they had some answers on paper. The top freshman class in the country before Amani Bates committed to Memphis, plus DeVanте Jones, a conference player of the year from Coastal Carolina. Theoretically, those guys were going to be plugged in and not look too different than last year's team. However, that hasn't been the case. They're 5-3 with losses to North Carolina, to Seton Hall, to Arizona. Those 3 teams are not bad, but Michigan has not been able to get it done against the better teams on their schedule thus far. Let's figure out why. It starts with Hunter Dickinson. Their All-American center. He's not playing like an All-American. He only took 6 shots against Tarleton State, 5 shots against North Carolina. Now, whether that's something that's Hunter Dickinson's problem or Michigan's schematic problem offensively is up for debate. However, they're throwing a lot of double teams at him, and that's because he's not surrounded by shooting. And when I say they, I really mean every single opponent Michigan has seen. The game plan is just to take Hunter Dickinson out of games, and right now Michigan doesn't really have answers because he's surrounded by guys who can't make shots or make plays with the ball in their hands. Starts at the 4 position. Really poor play. They're getting 36 minutes a game from Brandon Johns and Terrence Williams. Both those guys shoot under 40% from the floor, under 30% from 3, and 70% or worse from free throw. On top of that, DeVante Jones has kind of been a non-factor. There's a saying, guys, they impact the game, but it doesn't show up in the box score. DeVante Jones is the opposite. Everything he does on the floor does show up in the box score, good and bad. He gets a lot of steals. He fouls a lot. He's just kind of erratic in general, and he doesn't shoot a lot of threes. Historically, he has been a volume 3-point shooter. He's not doing that for Michigan right now. He doesn't look comfortable, and this team just really feels like they don't have a good identity. But again, it all comes back to shooting. They are 271st in the country in percentage of shots taken from behind the arc versus opponents who are 137th. Their opponents are just shooting way more threes than they are. Now, what could get better? Michigan has a ton of youth and a ton of talent that can develop in real time, and we're already seeing that with Moussa Diabate, who's gone from coming off the bench to starting at the power forward spot. Frankie Collins looking like he might do the same at the point guard spot. And then you've got a guy in Kobe Buffkin who right now isn't even in the playing rotation, but I see the coaching staff sticking him right by them on the bench, first spot next to the coaches every single game. I think there's a breakout coming, or at least an entrance into the rotation coming for him. He'd really help them with some shooting, with some playmaking in the guard spot. Caleb Houstan, a guy we haven't mentioned, supposed to be an NBA lottery pick, been pretty inefficient so far on the course of the season. He just had a great game against San Diego State. I think Caleb Houstan can lead this team in scoring. I think he can be a lot more efficient just making shots than he has been thus far this season. He's getting pretty decent looks. And when you pair him with a guy who has been playing great in Eli Brooks, this team's offensive ceiling is a lot higher than it has been. Now, the last thing they need to do is embrace defense. This team last year was one of the best defensive teams in the country, and it was built around Hunter Dickinson anchoring the paint. He hasn't gone anywhere. Moussa Diabate should be a great defender. Frankie Collins makes things happen defensively when he gets into the game. To me, this team has to be a defensive first team until they can figure out where the shooting comes from. I think they have the pieces to do so. The question is if they can embrace the mentality and go out and execute a defensive scheme that can hold teams to pretty inefficient offensive games to buy themselves some time to get comfortable in the roles that the freshmen need to grow into on the offensive side of the ball. How fixable is this? Scale of 1 to 10. I would bet that this is an 8.5, that Michigan does find these answers and ends up playing close to the ceiling that they had projected for themselves preseason. I do think this team will play their best ball come March. I don't know that I'd predict them to make a Final Four like a lot of people did preseason. I don't know that I'd predict them to compete for a Big Ten conference, but I do think this team is a Sweet 16 team. And all they got to do is figure out how they can get some better spacing around Hunter Dickinson, who's going to make some shots, and if they can get back to that defensive first mentality that they had last season. I think Juwan Howard figures it out. We'll have to wait and see. Let's move to the number 2 team on my list, the Memphis Tigers, coming off an NIT championship last season, a preseason top 10 team in a lot of spots. And they had the number 1 recruiting class in the country after Imani Bates joined Jalen Duren, coming to Memphis to play for Penny Hardaway. A lot is wrong with this team right now. If you haven't seen it, you've probably been living under a rock. They've lost 3 straight games to Iowa State, to Georgia without their best player, and to Mississippi. They might have the worst chemistry of any team I've seen in my entire life. Penny Hardaway is putting everybody on blast, saying the players don't care, saying he needs to start playing the guys who do care, and they would be undefeated if he did that. Does he realize that he's the coach and he does make the decision on who gets to play? It seems like this comes down to a Landers Nolly versus Imani Bates type thing. Nolly sort of has the reputation of a guy who's a little bit toxic in the locker room, and it seems like Penny is publicly calling out his veterans, aka Nolly, and siding with his freshmen. However, he moved Imani Bates to the bench for their last game. And Imani's been pretty inefficient himself. That's the worst part of all of this. Nolly and Bates both are playing really poorly. Nolly's down from 13 points a game on 41% shooting to 8 points on 36%. Bates leads Memphis in scoring and shots, but he's shooting 38% from the floor, 31% from 3, and 69% from free throw, with 2.6 turnovers to just 1.3 assists. For a guy who was lauded as one of the most prestigious shooting prospects coming out of high school in a very long time, that's just not good enough. Now, chemistry is one thing, but the on-court production just hasn't been enough to win on the offensive side of the ball for this Memphis team. And I'm not exactly confident that there are answers on this roster to figure it out. They don't have a point guard. What could get better for them? They got to get back to defense. They have the 17th best defense in the country. Last 2 seasons, Memphis was in the top 5 on KenPom in defensive efficiency. This year, 17th isn't going to cut it. With the offensive problems that they have, this team has to get back into the top 5 and be the top of the elite tier of college basketball on the defensive side of the ball. I think they have the pieces to do so, but defense takes a lot of buy-in, a lot of communication, a lot of guys that want to play together and for each other. Right now, Memphis isn't really doing that. And on top of that, Memphis fouls a ton. They have the 336th best opponent free throw rate, 42%. They have the 4th highest free throw rate themselves in the country. They get to the line a ton, but it's not an advantage because they foul the other team so much every game. And a lot of them are the dumbest fouls coming off turnovers in the open court. Speaking of turnovers, they have the 7th worst turnover rate in the country. If you go look at the other teams that are in the same stratosphere as them on that list, there's no other team that's going to make the NCAA tournament. Now, the problem with this, fouling and turning the ball over are sort of staples of Penny Hardaway's Memphis teams the last few years. These teams are just even more dramatically worse in those categories in a glaring way than the other teams have been just bad. Even if this team improves, it's not necessarily going to just come to an end in those 2 categories. They're still going to foul. They're still going to turn the ball over. They're still not going to have a point guard. They're really going to have to rely on an elite defense to cover up for a lot of glaring issues. And if they don't like each other, I don't necessarily know how they get there. How fixable is this for Memphis? I'm giving it a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10. I don't think they can get there. I don't think there's answers on this roster in the biggest areas of concern. And on top of that, I just think this team hates each other. And it's a bad recipe. Someone's going to hit the transfer portal midseason, or this is going to be a very painful, dragged out finish. Maybe another NIT appearance, but probably not an NIT championship for Penny Hardaway and the Tigers. The 3rd team on my list, the Oregon Ducks. Dana Altman has earned his respect. No matter who he's rolling out there, this team should always be a preseason top 25 team. He's had a very successful program. However, there's a lot of new faces. Again, the one theme with all of these teams has been So many new faces, but I liked these new faces on paper. Quincy Guerrier, Jacob Young, Davion Harmon, plus the returnees in Will Richardson and Eric Williams, plus a 5-star center in Nate Biddle. I was sold. I had Oregon in my top 10 at the beginning of the season. However, they're 5-4 right now, coming off a loss in overtime to Arizona State, losses to Houston, St. Mary's, BYU. What's wrong with Oregon? Right now, you can look at those losses and not be too concerned because Houston, St. Mary's, and BYU have all been pretty damn good teams so far this season. Arizona State's the one that raises the red flag, though. And if you look a little deeper into it, there's some pretty large problems for this team, starting with the fact that their transfers have been really inefficient. Jacob Young and Davion Harmon in particular in the backcourt have not been playing efficient basketball on the offensive side of the game. Jacob Young's 25% from three on 2.7 attempts per game. Davion Harmon's 35% from the floor on 7.8 attempts per game. Now, there are sides of those two players that aren't actually that bad. Jacob Young's 51% on twos this season. Harmon's 37% on threes. But the other side of that isn't there. And together, I don't know how those two mesh. Quincy Guerrier, 24% from three this season on 3.7 attempts. They're just missing a lot of threes. This is the lowest assist rate of any team that Dana Altman has had at Oregon in his career. These guys don't really have playmakers in the backcourt. Will Richardson and Eric Williams, the guys that are returning, haven't really taken the jump that you've seen former Oregon stars like Chris Duarte do. Will Richardson went from 11.3 points last year to 11 points so far this year per game. Eric Williams from 10 last year to 11 this year. They either need their backcourt to step up and play a lot more efficient ball, or they need their returnees to take a jump and be first-team all-conference types. And right now, that's just not really there. And on top of that, Nate Biddle, the 5-star, non-existent. 6 minutes per game, 33% from the floor. He just doesn't look like a guy who can even be in the rotation right now. That's a lot to ask when you're replacing Amaruyi, Chris Duarte, LJ Figueroa, 46 points per game from last year's team. And right now, the guys that they are plugging into those spots just aren't getting it done. Now, what could get better? A lot. They're not top 100 in any offensive category right now. Jacob Young, his assist rate's down. Last year, 23 was his assist rate at Rutgers, down to 17 this year. I think he's capable, but right now, Jacob Young's taking a ton of shots. He's taking as many shots as Will Richardson and Eric Williams, and his efficiency doesn't back up that he should be doing that. I think they need to get Young in a spot where he's playing more of the facilitator role, getting other guys involved. Increase the shot attempts for Richardson and Williams. Those guys only taking 9 attempts per game right now. They need more. They've been really efficient. If you can get those guys up to 12, 13 shots per game, suddenly I think that offense starts to look a little better. Now, there's reason to believe this could turn around, at least offensively a bit for Oregon. In terms of three-point luck, in their 4 losses this season, Oregon opponents are shooting 38% from three on 79 attempts, 30 makes, 79 attempts. Oregon shooting only 22% in those losses, 14 for 63 from three. I got to think water finds its well at some point. These Oregon players are not bad shooters. Jacob Young, Davion Harmon historically have made shots. I think just sliding some of those attempts to the guys who have been more efficient, Will Richardson, Eric Williams, and then letting Harmon and Young get a little more comfortable, let Young play the facilitator role. I think over time, these guys can't shoot this poorly. They've actually on the season outshot their opponents from three. So they're just doing it in a massive way in big wins. Just their losses have been so drastic, they've had no chance in non-competitive games. I think over the course of the season, that changes. I buy that this Oregon team can fix things. I'm going to give them a 7.5 on a scale of 1 to 10 for how fixable this will be. I think they're going to make the tournament. I actually think they will compete in the Pac-12, finish in the top 4 in that conference. Probably not end up touching Arizona and UCLA for an actual conference championship, but finish 3rd or 4th and then find a mid-range like 7 or 8 seed in the NCAA tournament. Next up is the Maryland Terrapins, formerly coached by Mark Turgeon. Maryland fans, not really happy with Mark Turgeon. Mark Turgeon, not really happy with Maryland fans. That marriage was doomed from the start, and now he's gone. They're left with Danny Manning. They're left with Fats Russell, Kudus Wahab. They lost Aaron Wiggins and Daryl Morcell. Some places had them top 10 preseason. They were a consensus top 25 team. All of a sudden, that's all disappeared. The head coach is gone. Losses to Louisville, Virginia, Northwestern, all top 40 teams on KenPom, by the way. But even their wins, not really impressive. Single-digit wins against Hofstra, George Washington, Richmond, and a loss to George Mason. Now, if if you look deeper, what's going on? Their backcourt is just horribly inefficient. Eric Ayala is shooting 33% from the floor on 13 attempts per game, 29% from 3 on 7 attempts per game. That's worse than Fats Russell. Fats Russell's doing what he's done his whole career. It's who he is. 36% from the floor on 10 attempts, 26% from 3. It's not good. I mean, when you're playing with a backcourt of two guys who can't even sniff 40% from the floor, and they're both volume shooters, you're in big trouble. And that's even if you had other guys who were playing well offensively around them, which Maryland doesn't. They only have one guy on the roster who shoots 30% from 3 or above. That's Hakeem Hart at 41%. He takes the 6th most shots on the team. I don't know how you solve that. They're 28% from 3 as a team, 314th in the country in three-point percentage. Their opponents are shooting 35%. They're 283rd in defending the three-point line. And how I talked with Oregon, how it might just be luck, I don't think that's luck with Maryland. I don't think they have shooters other than Ayala, who I think can play better than he has, but he's asked to do so much, carries such an offensive burden for a team that just doesn't have those guys playing well right now. It's not a good recipe for success. What can they fix? They actually have a pretty imposing interior presence in Qudus Wahab. They have a good 2-point percentage on defense, opposing team shooting just 44%. That's 50th in the country. They have a really good block percentage. I think they could play inside out a little more, both offensively and defensively. They got to funnel teams off the three-point line, try to force them to make contested shots in the paint over Wahab. And then offensively, they got to move some of those shots from their inefficient backcourt to guys either on the wing or really, I'd like to see Wahab get more involved. He's shooting 60% from the floor on 6.8 attempts. He's only playing 20 minutes a game. He did more than that last year at Georgetown. They've got to make him a larger centerpiece on this team. Otherwise, I think this team could honestly be doomed. On top of that, they're playing the second fastest tempo in Mark Turgeon's career at Maryland. They need to slow down. They need to rein in the guards. Fast tempo does not suit two guys who are super inefficient in Russell and Ayala right now. Limit possessions, get the ball inside, win with your defense, which is top 40 in the country right now, and all of a sudden things might look a little different for Maryland. Is that going to happen? Is Danny Manning going to want to make massive changes to the way this team plays? Is Danny Manning even capable of building a winning team? I'm skeptical. Scale of 1 to 10, how fixable is this for Maryland? I'm only going to give this a 3.5. I do buy their talent. I think Eric Ayala is a high-level player, potentially an all-conference type, but he's not playing like it right now. And the surrounding parts are so far from where they need to be. Wahab is really the only thing that looks bright for me on the offensive side of the ball, and they're just not getting him involved enough. So I think it's possible, but I don't see it happening under Danny Manning. I think they're going to be a lot worse off than they would have been just keeping Mark Turgeon, at least in the regular season. Last but not least, the Virginia Cavaliers. I actually feel a little bad including Virginia on this list. Nobody really had this team as a top 20 team preseason. They were a fringe top 25 team, depending on which preseason poll you looked at. I actually said preseason I thought this team would be a bubble team. I caught a lot of shit from Virginia fans on Twitter for that. Safe to say so far, they're looking like a bubble team. Now, they lost a lot. They lost Sam Hauser, Jay Huff, Trey Murphy, Casey Morsell, Wolde Tensei, McCoy, 6 of their top 8 scorers from last season. But the guys that they've plugged in are not really doing the things Virginia's been best at over the last decade. Their defense is only 50th on KenPom right now, despite only playing 2 good offenses all season in Iowa and Houston. If you go all the way back to 2014, 7 consecutive years, Virginia had a top 10 defense until last season. They finished 36th on defense, but that was okay because their offense took a jump up to 17th in the country. This year's team, right now, 50th. I don't know if that's necessarily going to improve. Now, the pack line defense that they're known for, they give up a decent number of threes, but historically, opponents haven't been making those threes. They've been very well contested, tough, late shot clock type shots. Last year, teams shot 33% from 3 against Virginia, and that's part of why their defensive rankings took a dip. This year, still at 33%, and that's tied for the highest that opponents have shot against Virginia in the last decade. Now, while there's concerns with their defense, offense has been the bigger problem right now. This team does not have guards other than Kihei Clark who are threats to score efficiently. Armand Franklin and Reese Beekman on the season are 13 for 65 from 3 combined. That's 20%. And those are the only 2 guards other than Kihei Clark they have in the regular rotation. The scary part of this is that Kihei Clark has been playing phenomenal. 43% from the floor, 43% from 3, 94% from free throw. He's been as good as you could possibly expect him to. And the Virginia offense is still struggling. Along with Clark, Jaden Gardner, the East Carolina transfer, has been solid, 14 points per game on 56% from the floor. So at least they've got two things working well. But when the cupboard's empty around them, I don't really know who Virginia can turn to. How do they fix this? Either the defense needs to get back to that elite level, or the offense has to be passable. And right now, neither of those things are happening. They only shoot 17 threes per game. That's 322nd in the country. And that's because Gardner and Caden Shedrick are not shooters. Franklin and Beekman are the two guys that are supposed to shoot on this team, and they're missing so many shots. It's like this year's roster is trying to be a Virginia team, doing all the things they've done well for the last decade plus, but they're just not good at those things. And I think it's because these players aren't really built to do what Virginia teams do best. I don't think there's going to be massive adjustments because I think Tony Bennett teams do what Tony Bennett teams do. This team's just kind of going to be mediocre at what Virginia's done best for over a decade. How fixable is this? Because of everything I just said, I don't think there is much adjustment to be made, and I don't think this team is going to fix itself. Barring Armaan Franklin and Reese Beekman catching fire from three, this team doesn't have enough offensive threats to survive being just a good, not great defense. And on so few possessions, if you can't score and you're not stopping teams at the elite rate the Virginia teams have historically, it's a really tough recipe for success, even in a down year for the ACC. Let me know in the comments what you think of this video. If I'm right, if I'm wrong, if you're with me that Michigan and Oregon could turn things around, if you're against me and you think Maryland, Virginia, and Memphis are going to be really good at the season end. I want to hear from you. Subscribe to Sleepers Media. Thanks everybody for watching.